Good morning. Just waiting for the thumbs up in the back. I got the thumbs up, so that meant it was time to go. Time to go. It's good to see you this morning. Happy New Year. Yes, definitely. You know, as you think back through a year, it's amazing the kinds of changes that can occur within a single year. Sue and I are at a point in our lives where our kids are all grown up, they're all adults, and, you know, there's a lot of change every year with your kids and that kind of stuff. And you think after you get to this age, you know, and beyond, sort of the change is less. It's really not. It's really not. We're experiencing all kinds of change this year. We're going to have another new grandbaby that we just learned about a few weeks ago, and so change. It's coming. It's not David, it's the young one who just got married back last year. So they're going to have a baby something or other coming up in July. They're going to keep the sex unknown for themselves and for the rest of us. So it'll be a surprise for all of us. But, well, welcome. We're excited to see the new changes that are coming for us as a church as we continue to pursue God's big story. And that's what we've really been talking about for several months now, right? How can we align our lives with what God is doing in a big way across the earth? And so we've been studying that, and we're really excited. And we've been moving into the book of Colossians to really gain a better idea of how our lives can align with that. Yes, should we dismiss the kids? Darn, it's going so well. We're going to take a pause for a commercial break here. We'll be right back. Kids, you are dismissed to go to children's ministry this morning. Sure, the teachers were like, where are the kids? There's no kids. Hi there. Scary old man up front with the bald head. Awesome. We looked at, for alignment, one of the key components of that is this thing of spiritual stability. Right? That's the groundwork, the framework, the fertile ground, the foundation, however you want to think about it, right? Upon that is built our spiritual transformation. And so, you know, as we've been studying through the letter to the Colossians, we're realizing Paul is aiming at this concept of spiritual stability. How do we get it? What are the things that interrupt it? What is it? That kind of stuff. And so as we take a look through, we realize, man, at the beginning, Paul started out saying he was so thankful for the work of the gospel. And as we realized, holy cow, it is the gospel that begins this possibility of having spiritual stability. It begins right there with the gospel. Accepting the work that Jesus has done for us is the beginning part, the beginning step of having spiritual stability. And so he brings the gospel up very early in the letter. And then as we continue through, we see he's praying here that they would live in a way that reflects the image of Jesus. And so it is spiritual stability that helps provide the groundwork for spiritual transformation. And as we're transformed, we more and more reflect Jesus, his life, his character, his mission, his aim, his love. And so Paul prays for them continually that they would live in a way that reflects the character, nature, person, image of Jesus. And then he begins to remind them, right? Jesus redeemed us. He did this amazing work on our behalf so that we could choose to engage in this process, right? Without that work, there would be no way for us as people to engage in the process of our lives being restored to the image of Jesus. And so it is this foundational work, right? The work that Jesus has done and the redemption we experience. From that, we get to choose. It's not an automatic thing for us, this restoring process. It's a thing that we must choose to participate in. But he did that work on our behalf so that we could then choose to partner with him in the process of our lives being restored. So what is spiritual stability? As we continued studying through, we saw that it's being spiritually transformed by the indwelling presence of Jesus, right? He lives within us who believe in him through his Spirit. And then experiencing him in an increasing manner in the context of Christian community. This is our stability, upon which then growth occurs over a long period of time as we continue to choose to participate in that. And then for us as believers, spiritual stability results from trusting in Christ's work for us and in us, right? That's what's the point of communion. Right, whenever things get tough, whenever the battle comes into the mind, there's really one thing to do, and that is to press hard into this truth of what Christ has done for us and what Christ has done in us. We've got to grab onto that, hold on to that, cling to that with everything that we've got, even at the end of our wits and our reasoning. That's the thing we've got to cling to and hold on to, because that's what's going to provide the stability for us. And so aligning to God's big story requires this spiritual stability. And that's what results when we're continuing to trust in the work that Christ has done for us and in us. And that then leads to this spiritual transformation that God wants to do in us, and then he wants to do through us as we're engaging other people in his big story. So, it starts with Jesus and his gospel. It then requires our participation, which results in transformation. This leads then to us looking, walking, acting, loving more and more like Jesus. It goes back to him. It starts with him. It continues with him. It ends with him. It's really all about him. We make it about a lot of other things. But when we boil it down and remove all the muck and the mire and the dross, what's left over is it's really just about Jesus in every aspect, from beginning to the middle to the end. But we've got an enemy, right? We've got our own selves we've got to battle with, and we've got Satan and his world system that we've got to battle against. And these are all mind battles. We know this. And so in the middle of Colossians, Paul says this to them. Guys, see to it that no one takes you captive. When we're talking about captive, he's not talking about, right, getting put in jail, a physical jail cell. Look at what he says. He says, see to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit. Those things are things that relate to our minds. Philosophy and empty deceit. And he says these things are according to human tradition and according to the elemental spirits of the world. They're not according to Christ. So there's a continual battle. There's a continual battle to captivate our minds with human philosophy and empty deceit that is really the basis upon which Satan has built his world system. Those two things. So those will be the things that continue to battle for our minds. And he says, see to it, don't be taken captive by those things. He says, instead, reflect on what is according to Christ. And that's when he goes in and talks about all those things. And if we summarize those things in verses 9 through 16, we realize he's really talking about the work that Christ did for us. That's what we're to be taken captive by, what the work that Christ did for us. He died in our place. He set us free from the law master, right? We no longer have a legal binding to the law master. We're set free from that. We don't have to obey that. Even when he comes and says, yo, Bill, come on, bow down to me and I'll give you all the pleasures of the world, I can say, you're not my master. No, I don't need to do that. And he forgave us all our sin, and we talked about the implications of that, right? The entire record of debt from beginning to end has been eliminated, nailed to the cross, done. That's pretty amazing, right? Because I still go around and mess up. But none of those are counted against me. They're all forgiven. Whether I asked for forgiveness or not, when I believed in Jesus, God said, they're all gone. Everyone from beginning to end, gone. And then we also see in verses 9 through 16, Paul then bringing out the work that Christ did in us. Right? He made us alive together with Jesus. That's a work that he's done in us. We became a new creation. He has given us this new identity. No longer am I the old Bill, but I'm the new Beezus. Right? It's Bill combined with Jesus. Beezus. That's me. That's who I am. Holy cow, it's getting pretty bad. It's only January 1st. Remember, it's a new year. Bill and Jesus combined together, a new creation, a new Beezus. Or Jill. Ooh, I like Beezus better. Yeah, I like Beezus. Right, but he's given us this new identity. No longer do we have to look at ourselves. No longer should we look at ourselves in the old person, but it's in the new person as one who is alive from the dead. I am alive from the dead. I've been resurrected with Christ. That's the view I need to have of myself. And he has filled us completely with himself. Right? That's a work that he has done in us. And so these are the things that we're to ponder, that we're to return to, that we're to grab hold of, that we're to cling to with everything that we've got, especially when the mind battle is raging. We've got to cling to those things. So then Paul, like a master builder of theology here, a master builder of the mind, he moves in then and begins to talk about what are some of those things that the Colossians were being taken captive by. What are those things? What are the lies that are trying to combat these truths that we're to keep in the forefront of our mind all the time? So what we want to do is to look at what they were for the Colossians, and then we want to talk about, well, what are they for us? Because in every culture across the entire planet, Satan has already set up counter-arguments for the gospel and its implications. They're already there. And so they're prevalent in our own culture as well. So let's get into talk about some of these. Starting in verse 16, he says this, "Therefore," remember, in light of who you are, in light of the work that Christ has done in you and for you, "therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival or a new moon or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ." Right, and so we see the therefore. He's saying, in light of the things I just said about who you now are as a new creation, in light of the work that Christ has done for you, in light of the fact that your entire record of debt has been canceled, don't let anyone pass judgment on you. What does he mean there when he says that? Right? Evidently, there were those within their culture that were saying, hey, guys, you ain't got it right. Come on. You need to be observing these religious festivals here and these other things, right? Come on. How about the festival, the new moon, the Sabbath? Those things you've got to observe. Otherwise, you're subpar. You're not even children of God if you're not doing these things. So that's what was happening. He's saying, you must reject those lies. Those lies are not true. They're counter everything, right? They're saying if you get involved in doing these religious things, well, then God is happy with you. Then he'll accept you. Then you've got some spiritual significance. Then you'll be able to grow. And he's saying, guys, remember what I just said. In light of your new identity and the work that Christ has done, you must reject those things. They're counter everything that Christ has done for you. They're all arguments against the work of Christ because they're all talking about me and my works. Not focusing on the work of Christ, but focusing on the work of Bill. And he's like, they've got to be rejected. They've got to be rejected. So it seemed that there were some Jews, or at least a sect of Jews, or potentially messed up Jewish cult that was there just kind of trying to influence the church with these things. And Paul says, nah, right? These things, they have some principle in them. They're a shadow of the things that were to come. But now the substance has come. The substance belongs to Christ. He is here. He has fulfilled every one of the meanings of those foods and drinks and festivals and new moons and Sabbath. He's fulfilled that entire thing. So now that Jesus has come, he's saying, the real thing is here. The old stuff is obsolete. It says that in the book of Hebrews. They're obsolete, no longer required or necessary. So I wanted to come up with an illustration talking about Josiah and Tess and having a baby, right? So imagine, right? Right now well, at first, they were a little distraught. This was unexpected, and so they were like, oh, what are we going to do? But after you get over that sort of that shock factor at the beginning, you begin to think about, wow, this is amazing. There's life inside of me, right? And so we go to the doctor and we get the sonograms done, and even after the baby's born, we take lots of cute little pictures, with grandma and grandpa and all that good stuff. And so we cherish those pictures and things, right? We get them out and we look at them. But imagine, right, during the pregnancy, you kind of look at the sonogram, you try and see, oh, look, there kind of looks like an arm and a face. I just can't wait till it comes out. I'll say she just for fun. Statistically in the Covert family, as far back as I can remember, the first child has always been a boy by every single member of our family, including my sisters. So statistically speaking, they're going to have a boy. Brittany thinks they're going to have a girl. That's just what she's thinking. She could be right. Who knows? God knows. But imagine after the baby is born, right? And it's growing, and I want to spend some time with the baby. So what I do is I go back and I dig out my pictures, and I hold my pictures, and I cherish my pictures, and I kiss my pictures, and I go to bed and I snuggle with my pictures. And you guys would be going, what's wrong with him? I mean, he doesn't need the picture anymore because he's got the real thing. It has come. Why not just go over to their house and cherish the real thing and kiss the real thing and snuggle with the real thing? No, I want my pictures. I'm really happy with my pictures. They don't cry. They don't poop their pants. All right? And I can kiss them. Well, what's wrong with that? I'm taking something that was a shadow, something that was a picture, something that was just a representation, and I'm making it the real thing. And that's what participating in these religious festivals were for the Colossians. It's like participating in those things is empty because the real thing has come. The real thing has come. Put those away, right? Put those away. And so Paul is saying to them and for us, we must reject the lie that religious forms and religious observances, even ones that we've made up having to do with Jesus, we've got to reject the lie that they have some kind of spiritual significance. In and of themselves, as a form, doing them have no spiritual significance. In fact, we can begin to participate in a ritual thinking we're getting something from the ritual itself. All along, we're missing the substance. We're missing the substance. And so we must focus on the substance. That's why Paul laid that out first. Look at the substance, your relationship. You've been filled with the fullness of God, he says. That's real stuff. That's where our focus needs to be. And then the implications of the work that Christ did for us and in us. Not the religious observances and the rituals and those kinds of things. We've got to be really careful because we like those things. They're easy to do. We make them a law. We feel good when we do them because we did our God thing. It's just not that. It's just not how. Amen. It's just not how it works, right? Well, let's see what else he says here. He goes on and says some things very similar, just with a little different flair. Verse 18, he says, let no one disqualify you. Insisting on asceticism and worship of angels, going on in detail about visions, puffed up without reason by a sensuous mind. And not holding fast to the head, from whom the whole body, nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments, grows with a growth that is from God. So just like there were Jews who were trying to judge and condemn the Colossians because they weren't participating in these Jewish festivals, so also there were other cultish religions, maybe even having a Jewish flair, as I've been doing some reading, that were insisting on these things. If you guys want to really be real children of God, you'll beat your body and you'll starve yourselves and you'll participate in sleep deprivation so that you can be for God. That's how a real person of God operates. And it's interesting in our culture, right? If you see some of the movies, I think they overdo it sometimes. Oh, I was looking Angels and Demons. Was that a movie? Was that the one where the guy was like taking himself and beating himself with that whip? And was that it? Yeah. Right. So what they're doing is they're showing a form of asceticism there. Right, beating themselves up because of things that they've done. Trying to pay penance to God for their sin, that kind of thing. He says here, you guys aren't participating in that, and don't let anyone disqualify you. In fact, you need to reject those lies, that asceticism is the way to get to God, or the way to grow, or that you need to worship angels and venerate angels and make much of angels, or saints. And then they go on in detail about visions, and potentially these visions were visions that were a result of protein deficiency and sleep deficiency. And then they would end up having these visions, and they were thinking, by goodness, look at that, God spoke to me. He showed me something. What they were trying to do was to manifest the authentic visions that God actually gave prophets like Ezekiel. But they were doing it through their own means, through sleep deprivation and that kind of thing. And then they would go on and on about the details of these visions, puffed up by their sensuous minds and saying, this is what you guys need, Colossians. You need to do this so that you can get a real spiritual experience. And Paul says those guys are puffed up without reason in their sensuous minds, and they're not holding fast to the head. The head here, of course, is a reference to Christ, who is the head of the church. He says those guys are not holding fast to Christ. If you want to know how real growth occurs, it's by holding fast to the head. He says it's from the head that the whole body is nourished and knit together through its joints and ligaments and grows with the growth that is from God. That's how it happens. It's not through these super spiritual experiences, I'm going to call them. Super spiritual experiences. So Paul said you need to reject the lies that having some kind of super spiritual experience is really how you're a real child of God, or it's really how you connect to God, or it's really how you grow. That must be rejected. So he says, right? Functionally, what has to occur is staying connected to the head. And that's what all his teaching was before this point in time. This is how we stay connected to the head. We reflect on the truths of the gospel and the work that Christ did for us and in us. That's how we stay connected. And we stay connected through, as we look back earlier in Colossians, through participating in a humble community that's continuing to remind one another of these truths. So a couple cautions here, right? Caution number one. We got to reject the lies that religious forms and observances provide spiritual significance and growth. We must reject that. Even with communion, I'll say. Even communion itself, we have to reject the fact that in some way that provides some sort of spiritual significance when we participate in the action of communion. That's not what it's for. It's not a ritual that we come forth, and because I walked forward and I grabbed the cup and I grabbed the bread and I ate it and drank, that now, for some reason and in some way, that has provided some sort of spiritual significance. We must reject that. That is not true. It is the reminding of the truth of the gospel that has spiritual significance, not the action of taking communion. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So Paul's laying it out pretty clearly here. We've got to reject those religious forms as though they would provide somehow some sort of spiritual significance and growth. The second thing, we must reject the lies that super spiritual experiences provide some kind of spiritual significance and growth. They don't. The Christian walk is not about super spiritual experiences. It's about day in and day out, walking with Jesus, trusting in who he is, going back and reflecting on the work he's done for us, in us, in good times and hard times. It's that plodding ahead. Super spiritual experiences are not what we're to pursue as believers. We'll get more into that as we talk about what that looks like in our own culture. Caution number 2, and this is sort of the flip side, and this is for us. We also have to be careful that we don't call others to observe certain religious forms and observances as a means of spiritual significance and growth. Right? And we kind of do that. We kind of say, boy, if you would just get to church every Sunday, that'll do it for you. Well, that's a lie. It's not the act of coming to church that's going to help anybody out. It is the action of participating and having a collision with the truth of God's word. Hopefully that happens when we're gathered together as a church. But when you tell somebody, you just need to get your life straight and get to church, we're calling them into a religious form in that way. That's what we're doing. Really what they need is, dude, you need some time in God's truth. Why don't we spend some time together going through some things? Right? That's what they need. And so we've got to be careful we don't do that. And also we've got to be careful that we're not calling others into this pursuit of a super spiritual experience as a means by which they can grow and have significance. So those are the cautions, right? We ourselves have to be careful that we're not falling into the trap of believing these things. We've got to reject that. And we've got to be sure we're not calling others into these things as well. Because they're empty. The substance is Christ. These other things are empty. Yeah, right, Paul made it clear. If we're believing these things that are untrue and calling others into these things, then it's an indication we ourselves are not connected to the head. We're not connected to the head. Well, Paul goes on. Gets even better, guys. Gets better. He says, if with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world. Now, this if here isn't, well, maybe you did and maybe you didn't. This if is, guys, you did. If, and it is true, you did die with Christ to the elemental spirits of the world, then why in the world, as if you were still alive in the world, do you submit to regulations? Do not handle. Do not taste. Do not touch. He says here, these are referring to things that all perish as they're used, and they're according to human precepts and teachings. So we looked at the religious observances and the religious forms. We looked at super spiritual experiences, and now Paul is focusing on the laws and regulations that we can tend to form. Those things. Right? He says, man, if with Christ you died to the elemental spirits of the world, why, as if you're still alive in the world? Basically, it's why do you act like you're still alive in the world if you died to that? And here's what I mean, guys. You're submitting to regulations like do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. Paul says these are all according to human precepts and teachings. That's not part of the biblical walk with Christ. It's actually part of human precepts and teachings. thinking that if we just don't do that and don't do that and don't touch this and don't go there and don't, then somehow we'll experience some sort of spiritual significance or growth. And look at what he says right after this. This is profound. Watch this. He says, these have indeed an appearance of wisdom. They look really good on the outside. It looks like, wow, man, that's a holy saint right there. He don't do that, and he don't do this, and he don't do that. And I mean, he's like walking a straight line. He's like, well, they have and indeed an appearance of wisdom in promoting self-made religion and asceticism and severity to the body, all that. But look at what he concludes. But they are of no value. We got to hang on that for a bit. No value. They are of complete utterance. No value. In doing what? In stopping the indulgence of the flesh. He's saying these things will not in any part play a role in changing your character. They'll have no place at all in that. They won't do it. They might look like good boundaries on the outside, and if you can use your willpower to adhere to them, it'll look good, but it does nothing on the inside to transform your heart and your mind into the image of Jesus. They have no value in stopping that at all. So you might have the bounds up and you might run up against them, but you've got this battle going on, this urge happening, because there's something that our flesh takes with law and says, if I can't do that, I want to all the more. And so if you are living by laws like this, you are living in a very difficult situation. And Paul concludes, look, he says right here, they ain't going to stop any kind of desire that you got inside. You can put up all the bounds you want, but it's not going to stop the desire inside. It's still going to be there. Whoa. That's pretty heavy. That's really heavy stuff. So does that mean we just go do everything we desire? I'm not going to answer that question right now. But that's almost what it seems like we can conclude. All right. Let's conclude here for a little bit here, a summary of the stuff we've covered so far. All right, religion says, observe these forms and these rituals, these holidays, pursue these super spiritual experiences, obey these laws, and then you'll have some spiritual significance, you'll grow, you'll be a holy person. That's what religion says. If we stack that up against what the biblical truth is, here's what it says. Hold fast to the head, which is Jesus. Cling to the gospel, the truth of the gospel, its implications, which is the work that Christ has done for us and in us. If we're holding fast to those things, then you'll be stable and you'll grow over time. And so Paul is really calling them to reject anything having to do with religion and to embrace everything that has to do with the person and work of Christ. Everything. Well, I wonder what are some of the religious observances in our culture today. You know, what are those things? Well, I think one is the same as that they were dealing with back then, and that is observing the Sabbath. Observing the Sabbath. If you've grown up in any sort of Christian culture, this may have been promoted pretty heavily, right? On Sunday, we don't work on Sunday. We don't mow our yards on Sunday. We don't go anywhere on Sunday. We just take this day unto God. That's basically what it is. We're going to take this day of rest unto God. It's going to be my day to focus on God's stuff. And when I come into God's house, I want to dress up to show God respect. And this is sort of the Sabbath in our culture. You know what? Jesus has actually fulfilled the Sabbath completely. We meet on Sundays because it's a convenient time to meet. Most people don't have to work on Sunday mornings. It doesn't matter what day that we would meet. Jesus doesn't really care. What he cares is that we're a humble community seeking him together and that his truth is paramount in our minds. That's what he cares about right there. He has actually come and fulfilled the Sabbath, so Jesus himself is our rest. He is our rest. We don't need a day to set aside that we're going to focus on resting for God. Every day is a day of rest for us when we're focusing on Christ. He is our rest. Remember, he filled us completely. We are in him completely. He's the rest. And so observing the Sabbath, it's one that we could struggle with, especially if you grew up in a fairly conservative Christian culture. Here's another one. Celebrating religious holidays. Yes, like Christmas. And along with that is this time period of Advent, right? So, am I saying stop celebrating Christmas? No, of course, that's not what I'm saying. If we use it as a time to reflect on Jesus, what he's done for us, that's fine. The problem becomes when we look at something like Christmas and say we have to celebrate this or God is not happy with us. That becomes the problem because now we're associating the celebration of Christmas with some sort of spiritual significance, some kind of thing that gets at the heart of God. And he's like, I don't really care if you celebrate Christmas or not celebrate. I want you to celebrate Jesus every day. That's what he wants. The fact that we take a special day is not a big deal at all. Every day for us is Christmas Day because we're celebrating the work of Jesus. We do that every day. So the fact that we have a special day doesn't need to be that way. So I'm not saying don't celebrate Christmas, but what I'm saying is have the right perspective. If you choose not to celebrate it on that day, that's okay too. You could celebrate Christmas never. Or you could say, we're going to do it July 1st because it just seems to be a better time of the year. And maybe we'll make a little family thing and just, focus on Jesus in a very special way that day more than the other days that we're focusing on him. It doesn't really matter. We've got to be sure that religious holidays aren't something we look at and say we must participate in these or God is not happy with me. That's the problem. Easter is the same. It's the same. We have, in Christian culture, we've blown this up to be some sort of really special holiday that, man, if we weren't to celebrate Easter on Easter, the building might fall down, crumble to pieces. And God is like, I really don't care. I want you to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus every day. Every day, focus on that. And if we would focus on that every day, I think we'd be a lot more spiritually stable and would experience much more growth. And so Easter and Lent and those kinds of things, they have no spiritual significance for us as believers whatsoever. The participation in those. The truth behind these, very important. The observance of these holidays, not necessary. Am I saying don't have these or don't celebrate these? No, I'm not saying that at all. We want to have the right perspective, though. We can celebrate and focus on Jesus that day, or we cannot, and it makes no difference to God at all. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. Again, he wants us to focus on the truths behind these every day. Every day. He wants us to be giving gifts and meeting needs for people every day. Every day. So, how about this one? Mountaintop experiences. Yes. Like retreats. Are retreats a bad thing? Christian retreats? No, they can be very good things. The problem is this. In my mind, if I'm like, oh, I can't wait till such and such retreat comes because then I'm going to really be able to connect with God. Well, that's a problem. If you can only connect with God during special times and special things, then it either indicates a misconception on your part or it indicates some real, spiritual infancy there. But we're to experience God in a very meaningful way every day. Every day. Now, retreats can be a really good thing to go to. You kind of get away. It's a focus on some truth. You might feel like during these times I can express more and get some more things out that I'm struggling with. That's all a really good thing. But what I'm saying is if we're looking to mountaintop experiences as the means through which I am going to grow and connect with God, then that's a fallacy. That's a problem. Okay, conferences are the same thing. Now, I can remember back, in the mid-'90s, they were having Promise Keepers conferences, and we really enjoyed going as guys, and I was pretty young in my faith at the time, and I did learn some things from those, and I thought they had some pretty good initiatives afterwards where guys were getting together, right? Well, that should have been happening with or without a conference. Guys hanging out, people getting together in small, humble communities. Again, the problem is when we look at these and say, I can't wait to get to the Beth Moore conference because there I'm going to really connect with God in a big way. Again, that indicates a problem. You should be connecting with God in that way often, not the one time a year when I get to go to the Beth Moore conference or the men's conference or some other conference. This one's a little sensitive right here. I don't know that we've got a big issue with this, but some people feel like the only time they can really connect with God is when they come on a Sunday morning and during the worship time. And there are churches who really promote that time as a time when you can come and really experience God. And that's a problem. That's trying to promote a super spiritual experience so that you can have some kind of spiritual significance and growth during that time. And that is a fallacy. That is a lie. We've got to reject that. I experience stability when I embrace the truth of what Christ has done for me and in me. And that provides the stability through which then I grow as I commit to that over a long period of time within a humble community. I like music on Sunday morning, don't get me wrong. It is the perspective that we come with that is the problem. The music's not the issue, it is my perspective. If I feel like I can only connect with God through music on Sunday mornings, that's a big issue, all right? We're not going to get rid of music. We like music. It is a neat way to interface with God, and for us as a community, it's a neat way for those truths to be rolling around in our minds throughout the week. Do you ever notice how that happens? That's a good thing too. I'm just saying, when you feel like the only time you can connect is at that time, then that's a problem. Does that make sense? We're not getting rid of music. Okay. Okay, we are. We are going to get rid of music. Just kidding. We will. The last thing in our culture, and this has been building probably for the past, 50 years or so within in Christian circles, and that is providing these ecstatic worship experiences where the full range of spiritual gifts are at play, and you come into an environment and it's just mayhem, and people thinking that, that's where I can really connect with God, is I'm going to come into that and get all hyped up and experience this emotionalism and all these wacky things going on, and that'll really get me connected to God. And that can't be further from the truth. God is a God of reason, He's a God of order, and He's a God of transforming the mind. If the mind is not engaged in the truth of God's Word, you will not experience any kind of growth at all. All right, let me say that again. If the mind is not engaged in the truth of God's Word, then you will not experience any spiritual growth at all. The mind must be engaged with truth. That's where we change. That's where we transform. And so ecstatic worship experiences, I would say, fall into the realm of these super spiritual experiences. And there are Christian churches who promote, you got to really come in and experience this. You're going to love it, and you have to act this way, and you got to do these things. And when you do, you're just going to experience God in a new way. Well, you might experience something in a new way, but I don't think it's experiencing God in a new way. He wants to be experienced for sure, but he wants to be experienced through truth so that our minds are transformed, and he wants us to experience him in the context of humble community where we're serving each other and operating in his big story. I don't mind a nice worship experience on a Sunday morning. Again, okay, but if I'm thinking that's my ticket, to be a real, true child of God, then I'm off base. Okay, well, observing religious forms and pursuing religious emotional experiences is not the way to growth. In the same way, trying to obey and follow rules is not the means to growth. And so we have some of these, right? We set up these rules. Hey, do not drink. A good Christian boy doesn't drink or smoke or swear or dance. He doesn't watch R-rated movies. He doesn't listen to rap or rock music. That's a good Christian boy right there. I can remember back early when my wife and I got married, and then I started coming to church more often. This was my view right here. And I used my willpower to adhere to almost all of these. I had a challenge with two. Number one, I was in a rock band. Probably know which one I had a problem with. And the other one was, well, I danced, right? I like to dance. I like to wiggle around. And somebody says, and right there, that's why you shouldn't be doing that. But my concept of walking as a Christian was this idea that if I didn't do these things, then I had her down. I was good. I was good. And, and then going into the 10 Commandments, I didn't have adultery on my wife, and, I was trying to honor the Sabbath and keep it holy, and I was doing all those things thinking I got her down. Nobody's as good as me at this, I'm telling you what. And then God was like, boom! Opened up my eyes to the reality of the inside of who I am. And that hit hard and deep. And once that became apparent, these things really didn't matter anymore. I realized whether I did those or I didn't do those, I had some really deep issues on the inside that needed worked on. And so we tend to think that if we can just get down these rules to where I look good, then I've attained to some sort of spiritual level or significance or growth even. And Paul was very clear. You can obey all these things till the cows go home, but it's not going to stop any kind of indulgence from our flesh. It's not going to squash any kind of desire. Okay? You talk to guys that are struggling with pornography who've got a blocker on their computer. The blocker is great. I'm not saying don't have one. You should. But if you're depending on the blocker in order to curb the desire, you're out of your mind. That's not going to happen. Right? The fence doesn't fix the inside. And so when we place rules like these in our lives, thinking that we've somehow attained to some spiritual significance because I'm obeying all these, we've got to watch out because there's going to come a day of reckoning. Or should I say a day of wrecking? Because I had a day like that, and my life was wrecked. But that's where we must be. We must be wrecked of our thinking in this way so that God can rebuild something that's actually transformed into the image of Jesus more and more. And so I wonder what your view is this morning on religious observances and religious laws. if you find yourself relying on those things as part of your spiritual walk, I would say you're going to find a day coming soon, and it's going to be a wrecking day. Because these things cannot promote change on the inside. These things will not promote spiritual stability. If these were what could provide spiritual stability in our lives, Paul would have said very clearly, boom, observe these things and follow these laws and have these experiences and you'll be stable. But these things in the mindset of if I obey these and I observe these and I experience these, that mindset that those will provide some sort of spiritual significance, if I have that, they actually counter and battle and go against what the truth of God's word says. These are all what Paul groups into these two major categories, philosophy and empty deceit. That's where all of these things lie. And what did he tell the Colossians? He says, you must not be captivated by these things. They might look good, they might feel good, but there's no substance there. No substance at all for true stability and transformation. We must reject the lies that say that we need these things. And so spiritual stability leads us to reject these lies because they oppose Christ and his work for us and in us. We must reject those. If we want to remain stable, we've got to reject these things for sure. Here's what all these things lumped together really provide. They really provide the basis of what we call legalism. It's legal living. Right? It's observing religious forms and adhering to religious laws as a means of seeking spiritual significance and growth. I am somebody, and God sees me as somebody because I've done these things and I've obeyed these things. And that's a basis of legalism right there. And legalism is devastating. All of us struggle from one degree or another with legalism. Whether you want to admit it or not, we do. And Paul's saying that has to be rooted out. That has to be uprooted and cast away so that we're totally resting in God's love and grace for us as the means of our spiritual significance and growth. But legalism has a devastating impact to aligning with God's big story for sure. First thing is, legalism won't and can't produce stability, spiritual stability. Right? Paul was pretty clear with that. And if there's not spiritual stability, then we won't experience growth either. Legalism does produce judgmental atmosphere. Yeah, I've known people that have come out of a pretty legalistic environment, and in that environment, everybody is always comparing themselves with everybody else so that they can feel pretty good about themselves. And I'm not as bad as so-and-so. Look at so-and-so. I didn't do that. Holy cow. And so their whole frame of reference and identity is built on comparison of myself to you. It's devastating. That's a whole judgmental atmosphere right there. Where's the focus on Jesus? Well, it's down pretty low because I'm focused on me and you. Not in a good way, right? In a very prideful way. And so legalism produces pride. When I'm comparing myself with those around me, then I'm lifting myself up. I'm not going to compare myself to somebody better than me. Of course not. That'd be ridiculous. I'm going to compare myself to who I perceive to be less than me so I can be lifted up and be somebody, and God sees me as somebody because that's a nobody over there. Right? It produces all kinds of pride. Here's the other thing. It shuts down openness in relationships. My goodness, if I'm comparing myself with you, I'm never going to go to you and say, I got a problem here. Why? Because I want to perceive myself as better than you. If I share this with you, now I've come under you and you're better than me, and I can't have that. I got to stay on the top here. I'm not going to share my problems with you. In fact, I'm not going to share them with anybody. Won't share them at all. And so then I lose. I lose all the benefit of being open and sharing. So it shuts down openness in relationships, and it severely handicaps outreach. Severely handicaps it. My focus isn't even on trying to get other people saved. It's on trying to make myself look good. And that's where my focus is. And so imagine a whole group of people with that focus. They're not concerned about somebody being saved. Holy cow, if they are, it's just a guilt thing and a legalistic thing. I got to do it because God says I got to do it, and if I don't do it, then I'm probably not somebody, so I'll just drop a tract off in the toilet, where I'm going to the bathroom. Hopefully somebody will read it. That was my good thing for outreach today. Now I feel good about myself, and I can compare myself to you because you didn't do that. I got her down. The other way it severely handicaps outreach is when someone comes into an environment like that who's truly seeking God, they quickly are able to discern, this is a place where I don't feel comfortable. I'm not welcome here. Because we got all these holier-than-thous running around, and I'm not a holier-than-thou. And I got problems, and this is not a place for me. Or worse yet, somebody comes in and they try to fit in then. That's even worse. I'd rather have them leave, go find an authentic church than try to fit in with a legalistic church. So the consequences of legalism are devastating. Devastating. And that's why Paul is pretty hard against rules and regulations and trying to live our Christian lives by them. The good thing is this: what legalism tries to do and fails, Christ does. He does. If you go back through, it's interesting, as Paul here talks about religious observances, he says at the end, the substance is Christ. He brings it back to Christ, the one who actually can do and wants to do these things and will do as we participate with him in this. In the next section, talking about super spiritual experiences, he says, don't let anyone disqualify you. These guys going around with puffed heads, they're not holding fast to the head. Again, brings it back to Christ. Christ is the one who provides the growth for the body, he says. And then we're getting down here talking about religious rules. Again, he brings it back to Christ. With Christ, you died to the elemental spirits of the world. And so through each of these arguments, he has some way of bringing the attention back on Jesus every time, because Jesus is the answer for these. He squashes these things. So wrapping up here, true spiritual stability and growth, they come from rejecting the lies that are embedded in religious observances, super spiritual experiences, and obeying laws. And it comes from embracing Christ and his work in us and for us. So how can you tell if you're struggling with legalism at all? It's pretty hard to discern until you make a mistake. The way you process your sin is usually a pretty good indication of where you're at. When you sin and mess up, if you begin to beat yourself up, if you even punish yourself, I am not going to eat tonight because I did that. Well, that's asceticism right there, right? You're operating under legalism. If you begin to tell yourself all kinds of lies like, I'm no good, how could God be happy with me, and your guilt and your shame are piling up, and you're getting all weighed down by him, that's an indication that you're operating under legalism, not in the grace and the truth of Christ. And so when things are going well, it's kind of hard to tell. It's when things get screwed up. That's when you can tell. So assess, when things go wrong or you make a mistake, how do you respond? That'll be a good indication of kind of what level of legalism you're operating under. And all of us might say, oh, geez, I can't believe I did that. But if we hang in that mode and hours later and days later, we're still like proverbially smacking ourselves with a whip because we did such a terrible thing. Well, that's a problem. That's a big problem. The answer is right there, right? It's, well, yeah, did I mess up? Sure. But the entire record of debt was canceled. That means I stand before Jesus declared right in his sight. God still indwells me with the fullness of himself. That doesn't change. None of that changes. And the truth of the work that Christ did for us and in us never changes. So how much do you embrace that when you mess up? That's really how you can tell. And more, we want to embrace the truth very quickly after we mess up. And more, when others mess up, we want to bring them right to the truth. Get them grounded in that. Keep them focused on that, because that's where they're going to experience stability and in growth. So I'm done. I think we're going to wrap it up right there.